Welcome to episode 8 of the Revelation File. I'm your host, Wally Wood, and I'm still in an introductory phase, if you will, of this ministry. I'm sure that the vast majority of you don't know who I am or what this ministry is about. I've been in the news business since the 70s, and I've been a minister, ordained minister since the 80s, but I've been a minister all my life. And my whole life focus has been on end-time Bible prophecy from the time I was 8 years old. And so what I'm still doing is introducing you to the various different key elements of this ministry, because being a newsman or news researcher, I've got over 140 topics that I cover and research on a regular ongoing basis. And so much of what I show you is in the form of multimedia presentations. About every quarter, the fifth Sunday month, I host the Revelation File News Forum at Houston's Encourager Church here in Houston from about 4 to 6 p.m. in the Fellowship Hall. And I invite you to come and join us. I usually present a major media presentation like what you've been seeing here. This year we're going to be doing more interviews, live interviews on stage. So go to my website at wallywoodministries.com or the revelationfile.com, and you can leave your information with us and tell us that you're interested in being on our email list, and we'll send you out the notifications every time that we have a meeting somewhere. So again, welcome to today's show. We're going to give a general ministry overview to give you a little better understanding of the focus of this ministry over the past 40, 50 years. It doesn't seem like it's been that long, but in any case, I focus on major world trends and news events and uncoverings, developments. Back in the 80s, I started the Christian News Network on radio, and it was for the purpose of bringing together professional journalists, broadcasters who were Christians, reporting world news from a biblical and even prophetic perspective. So we cover a lot in the area of world developments, and that's been the focal point of this ministry all these years. And so as we go forward in today's program, I'll give you an update on the Revelation File and how it got started and where how it's developed. It started back in the 80s on the Christian News Network, and I'll give you a little more detail on that in just a moment. But my inspiration in the work that I'm doing comes from Billy Graham, and something that he said on national television back in 1962. I was 12 years old when I heard him say this: "World events are moving very rapidly now. I pick up the Bible in one hand and I pick up the newspaper in the other, and I read almost the same words in the newspaper as I read in the Bible. Those predictions are coming to pass so rapidly. It's wonderful to note that the Bible is still true, and it's being fulfilled every day round about us." My ordination, if you will, comes from something that Sir Isaac Newton said back in the 17th century, 18th century, where he says, "About the times of the end, a body of men will be raised up who will turn their attention to the prophecies and insist upon their literal interpretation in the midst of much clamor and opposition." And I number myself among the men that he's talking about who take the prophecies literally. My motivation comes from one Henry Spock, former Secretary General of NATO during the Kennedy administration, and something he said, where he said, quote, "We do not want another committee. We have too many already. What we want is a man of sufficient stature, to lift us out of the economic morass into which we are sinking. Send us such a man, and whether he be God or devil, we shall receive him." End of quote. If you know anything about Bible prophecy, you know that that's referring directly to the Antichrist, because the Antichrist will come forth as a god. In fact, he'll even present himself to be God, and he's going to turn into what the Bible calls the son of perdition, and he'll be totally controlled by the devil. So Henry Spock put it all in perspective in the context of world politics. My first book, Cashless Society, A World Without Money, came out in 1974. It was about 32 pages in length. But in that book, I described a world of electronic economics in the 21st century, where a central computer, which I called CENTCOM, would oversee all financial transactions. In 1981, CENTCOM became the Internet, and that's what we have today, a central computer system that oversees all of our electronic transactions. In that book, I talked about how the day would come when this CENTCOM would be attached to your soda machines, your gas pumps, even your street vendors doing business by electronic currency. And that's where we are today. So that was in 1974. In 2000, my second book came out, The Embedded Internet, The Final Evolution. And it was in this book that I talked about how the Internet would one day be attached to everything you touch and everything that touches you. And indeed, that's where we've come today. The final evolution of the Internet is to be attached to everything you touch and to everything that touches you, I said. Alan Zaitchik of Web Techniques magazine said, "Someday all devices will be connected to the Internet all the time. As web developers, it's our job to figure out what these devices will look like and what to do with them." Now, this book was written in 2000. It was in the early days of the Internet. The early designers and architects only had made allowances for 4.5 billion access points to the Internet in a world of approaching 7 billion at that time. And they figured that would be enough. What they didn't count on was the mobile technology that would quickly emerge as in the mid to late 90s. And they quickly had to hustle to create a different expanded version of the Internet. So we went from what was known as Internet Protocol version 4 in the early days to the newer Internet Protocol version 6, IP version 6, where we went from 4.5 billion contact points, access points to the web, to now we have between 340 and 420 trillion access points to the Internet. That came about in 2012. That's when the Internet of Things was born, where by way of sensors that were always online and connected would be attached to everything. It's estimated that by 2020, next year, you'll have in the vicinity of nearly 50 billion items with sensors embedded within them that have direct connection to the Internet. Presently, under this new protocol, you can assign to every human being on Earth 1 million URL addresses and still have millions left over for future generations. So the Internet has gone ubiquitous to such a degree where everything is going to be attached with a sensor. If it's not happening to you right now, it's going to. The new wave of clothing, jewelry, underwear, socks, shoes will have a chip. And you'll be connected to the Internet 24/7. In fact, Kevin Kelly, the co-founder of Wired magazine and executive editor at the time that he wrote this book entitled New Rules for the New Economy, made this comment concerning the future connections on the Internet. He said, "Eventually, every can of soup will have a chip in its lid. Every light switch will contain a chip. Every book will have a chip embedded in its spine. Every shirt will have at least one chip sewn into its hem. Every item on a grocery shelf will have stuck to it or embedded within itself a button of silicon. Soon, all manufactured objects, from sneakers to drill presses to lampshades to cans of soda, will contain a tiny sliver of embedded thought." That is where we are today with the Internet of Things. We also cover globalization, both on the political realm and the economic realm. William Greider, who was with Rolling Stone magazine at the time he wrote his book entitled One World, Ready or Not, made this comment: "A new map of the world is gradually being drawn. Everything seems new and strange. Nothing seems certain. The maps keep changing so rapidly that it has already become commonplace to speak of one world markets for everything from cars to capital. The diversity of the world's peoples is converging in this common experience, that being the delight of encountering new inventions, magical gadgets, or electronic machines that seem smarter than people. People in distant places are now connected by powerful strands of the same marketplace with no fixed center, no reliable boundaries. A globalized world. So here's the challenge that we face. There's a book called the Bible. What are we going to do with this book? Because the very things that you're hearing and are going to hear and seeing and going to see were prophesied in that one book. It's the most beloved and despised book in history. It is the only perfectly accurate book of prophecy in the world. Its prophecies demand an answer for every skeptic. True prophecy requires a living God of prophecy. That fact alone commands the existence of a God more powerful than the prophecies themselves. Think on that. Selah. Jesus said in Matthew 24:35, "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away." So what are we going to do with this book as we go into the darker days? The Bible predicts that there was to eventually come a final generation upon the earth, and that this last generation would see more and experience more than any previous generation. And it would be this particular generation that would witness the return of Jesus Christ. Jesus said, "When you see all these things coming to pass, know that my coming is near, even at the door. I tell you truly, this generation will not cease from the earth until all these things have taken place." And that, I may add, includes his return and that the life of that one generation. So what's happened to the promise of his coming, as recorded in 2 Peter 3, verse 4? Our ancestors are dead and buried, and everything's going on just as it has from the very beginning of time. Nothing's changed. And we would ask the question, are you sure about that? These three challenges. First, if prophetic scripture is correct and accurate, then in the course of time, the last generation had to eventually appear, and the prophecies of old would become the current events of the day. Secondly, there were signs declared in end-time Bible prophecy that were to occur only one time in the course of history. And many of those signs are happening today in the life of this one generation, like in none other that has gone before. The signs that remain are soon to follow those that are happening right now. And third, the Bible prophesies there is coming one last human leader of the world. He is known as the Antichrist, and he is to rule the entire world like none before him. For one man to rule the world, he must first control the world, and there's only one way he can do that, and that is through advanced technology. Advanced technology is designing and defining the future like no other industry has ever done. It's bringing the world together as one like never before. Consider for exchange for a moment the RFID chip. RFID standing for radio frequency identification. This chip is finding its way into every single thing on earth. Revelation 13:15 says, "He will cause all who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed." Now, speaking of the image of the beast made by the false prophet, some of you, these may sound like strange religious terms, but these are very real entities in the last days. And this image is going to cause everyone to receive this number. And without this number, they will not be able to work or shop, and they will be killed if they do not follow the command to worship the image of the beast. So we ask you, in a world of 7.5 billion, how's he going to know who's worshiping and who's not? Well, one of the areas will be through such things like smart dust. Smart dust are among the tiniest transmitters of data designed to look like dirt and mere dust. Mostly deployed by aircraft or on the wind, they will cling to shoes, clothes, walls, anything. Each particle has its own unique serial number. When hit with an interrogation signal by ground or air sources, each particle yields information on location and movement of the subject to which they are attached. It is being widely used in the Iraqi and Afghanistan wars. Now, before I go any further, and again, all these things that we're just touching on right now, I've got presentations that go into greater depth. But I'll say at this particular point, this is how some of the terrorists have been found in the Afghanistan war and the Iraqi war because of the smart dust on their bodies. And we'll go into the evidence of that in a future program. Shopper loyalty cards. This is something I like to do when I go to speak in public places. I'll usually pull out my keys and ask the audience how many of you carry these shopper loyalty cards on your ring of keys. And nearly about 100% of the audience would say yes. And then I point out to them and say, okay, now, those of you who have these loyalty cards, how many of you subscribe to either cable or satellite television? And again, a vast majority of people will keep their hands raised. And then I'll point out to them and say, okay, now, those of you who have cable or satellite, the next time the World Series comes on, I want you to tune in, call your neighbors, call your friends, your relatives that you know who have cable or satellite TV, have them tune in to the same channel at the same time, watching the same game. Then ask them this question: how many of you, what do you see on the outfield fence on your screen? And that's where you're going to find the difference. Because in the majority of cases, your neighbor, your friends, your family, watching the same show at the same time are going to see a different billboard on the outfield fence than what you see on your TV screen. And it's something that's known as pinpoint marketing or narrowcasting. And again, we will go into that into another episode here pretty soon. Your driver's license. Texas was the first state to embed easy tag technology in our driver's licenses. That was back in the late 90s. Since then, every state now has easy tag licenses, driver's licenses, which track your movement wherever you happen to go by way of those road sensors that are cut in the concrete at every intersection. Your car is registered, its presence, and your driver's license is registered in its presence. I've had some people say, well, I'll solve that. I'll just go ahead and wrap my driver's license in foil. And I'll just look at them and say, good. You do that and you've just set up a red flag. What do you mean? Well, your car is being registered as in motion, but there's no driver behind the wheel. That's going to get somebody's attention for sure. The mystery man is among us. And again, I have a PowerPoint presentation that we will address more specifically, not by name. I'm going to try to avoid mentioning names, but there are certain candidates that have been on my list for some time. And we'll take a look at them in an upcoming episode. End Time Bible Prophecy speaks of one last global leader immediately preceding the return of Christ. As I often say, Antichrist is pre-Christ. There is persuasive evidence in the world today that suggests that the Antichrist is indeed alive right now, and the day of his unveiling is very, very near at hand. In Luke 21:28, Jesus said, when these things begin to happen, be encouraged and lift your heads. Your redemption is at hand. That was Luke 21:28. Likewise, in Matthew 24, verses 33 through 34, which is one of my favorite verses, you've heard it here before, and also Isaiah 46, verse 11. Everything I prophesied came true, and now I will prophesy again. I will tell you the future before it happens, that you may know and believe me. I've spoken it, I will also bring it to pass. I've purposed it, I will also do it. Mark 13, verses 23 through 37, part of that segment reads, take heed, for I have foretold you all things. When you shall see these things come to pass, know that it is nigh, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, that this generation shall not pass till all these things be done. Take heed, watch, and pray. Watch, therefore. Watch. That's pretty emphatic. Luke 21, verses 28 through 36. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. When you see these things come to pass, know that the kingdom of God is nigh at hand. Watch, therefore, and pray. He keeps reemphasizing the same point over and over and over again. Now, if you didn't pick up on our previous broadcast, I presented this picture. It's a photograph. It's not a painting. Taken by a Polaroid camera. Polaroid camera images cannot be altered, cannot be manipulated. They're fixed. This was found in the wreckage of an airliner back in the 60s. And when they went to recover the bodies, they found this in the camera. And according to the onboard recorder, it noted that everyone on that plane saw this image in the sky just before it crashed. And there was tremendous peace on board in that chaotic situation. And this is an amazing, amazing picture given by the Lord himself. And I see it as an indicator of the times that we're living in. The scriptures that I just read to you emphasize over and over continually. This is not a time for the body of Christ to be afraid. In fact, the scriptures say so. Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed. Meaning, don't be caught off guard. Don't be shocked and surprised by the things that you're going to see coming upon the earth. They must happen, Jesus said. They must come to pass because it's written in the Word. So we find our peace not in the circumstances in which we live, but in the fact that His Word is sure and secure. And if you are a person living by faith, as the Scriptures declare we should be, then as you see these things begin to develop and unfold before you, you're going to become all the more closer to Him. The works that we're called to do, Jesus said, this kind of faith goes out by prayer and fasting. We're to take very seriously the times we're living in. Not somberly, but soberly. And be aware of the fact that at the end of the day, no matter where you're coming from or what your thought processes are, He always has the last word. We're all going to stand before Him. He is coming back. He's going to claim His own. He's going to rule on this planet for 1,000 years, according to the prophetic scriptures. And then the end will come. So, if there's any one purpose behind this ministry, as I told the Lord back when I was 18 years old, I want to dedicate the rest of my life to the research, writing, reporting on the signs of your return in my lifetime. And I've been dedicated to it for over 60 years now. And that's the only real thing I ever talk about. I'm probably one of the most boring guys, but I'll tell you what, we built quite a library of evidence. And the Lord told me in 1972 that I was not to say a word without the documentation to back it up. And He would see to it that I have all the documentation that I needed. And so this has been a ministry of documentation. When He put me in the news media, it was to hone those skills and to refine them to such a degree where I could put on presentations that would capture people's attention and lock them into the reality of our times. So, it's not about me. I'm here on this network because God opened the door. And He told me many years ago that He was going to give me a network of news outlets, and that He would also put me on a news network. We started with the Christian News Network back in 1981. We went up to about a dozen radio stations across the country at that time. It's interesting. I walked away from it like probably in the 90s. and left it behind, went on to other things. But you know, when God authors a vision, it never dies. He may just take it out of your hands and put it in somebody else's that he's prepared to pick up the baton and run with in the relay. You can go to christiannews.net online, and there you will see the Christian News Network in its rebirth. That's everything I ever imagined it to be, ever wanted it to be. It is a ministry, a professional news ministry of news journalists, reporters from around the world, reporting world news from a biblical perspective. And they're not paying for this advertising. This is a free plug for them. Being the founding pioneer of the concept of a Christian News Network, I'm very, very proud of what they've done. I'm very excited that the Lord chose me to give birth to that vision back in the 80s. And you owe yourself the opportunity to go visit them and subscribe to their newsletter and their input along the way. You'll be impressed. That's the Christian News. It's actually called christiannews.net, the Christian News Network. So the Lord is doing a mighty work in getting our attention and preparing us for the times that are coming and are even now at hand. And remember, Jesus said this is just the beginning of sorrows. It's not a message of gloom and doom. It's the message of the revealing, the unveiling, the appearance of our eternal hope in the sky. If you don't know the Lord, this would be the time to turn your life over to Him. And we thank you for tuning in and listening. We look forward to coming back to you in another program. And we just give praise to the Lord for everything we're doing. Thank you much. I'm Wally Wood. We'll see you in our next episode.
You have been watching the Revelation File Report with Wally Wood, a Wally Wood Ministries production from Houston, Texas. You are able to support the ministry by donating at wallywoodministries.com and by mail at Wally Wood Ministries, P.O. Box 42005, Houston, Texas 77242. Wally is available to present full 2-hour forums in your city called the Revelation File News Forum. For more details, contact Andy Valadez at 713-560-3348 or by email at andy@andyvaladez.com. The Revelation File News Report is a weekly update of global trends in the news as it aligns with end-time Bible prophecy. Tune in again next time and be sure to like and share this channel.